This is Front Up on Geno TV and Channel 99. Our guest today is very special. Tim Madden, the outgoing representative of the Cape and Islands, one of the Cape and Islands districts to the Massachusetts General Court, or the Assembly as it's called elsewhere.
Right.
Welcome, Tim.
Well,
thank you for spending some time with us.
Well, Dan, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. We've talked many of issues over the years,
That's
from
right.
your newspaper days to today, and we are
Exactly.
on a camera instead of with a pencil in your pan.
How does it feel to be stepping aside?
You know, I tell you, I'm relieved. I've so enjoyed it, and it's been a wonderful experience. And but I will tell you, the idea of not commuting back and forth to Boston is something I'm really looking forward to doing.
It's a big effort to get back and forth.
It is. You know, I represent the best district. It's truly beautiful, wonderful people that are so engaged in their communities and the politics in general. But it is geographically gorgeous but disconnected. And living on Nantucket is by far the most outlying of the islands, and it just added that additional wrinkle. Which
Did the district cover the Elizabeth Islands as well?
It does. And I was out there most recently on the Elizabeth Islands with the Lieutenant Governor, Polito, and we did a terrific day visit there. And Cuttyhunk is special.
It is. I've never been, but I hear it is.
It really is. They get around on golf carts. It's very pretty. Years ago, they buried all the wires there, and they generate their own electricity like we used to do. But they buried all their wires, so the vistas are special. It's really a pretty spot. Very few people. The smallest town in the Commonwealth, which is Gosnell. But it's nice.
How many people there year round?
They've got about 80.
So it's sort of a bit like Fisher's Island on the coast of Connecticut.
Yeah. And the interesting, they get about a third of their budget is paid for with mooring fees. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. That and what they make off the electricity.
Interesting. Yeah. What do you consider your accomplishments in these 8 years? I know you've been you led up. Why don't you go back and tell what you did before? Remind people what you did before. But
I've been involved with government here for a long time. At the time, before people like Tobias and a few others came along, I was probably one of the younger selectmen. I remember when I ran, I was a good 20 years younger than anyone else on the board. And I enjoyed that. I was on the land bank and did that, and involved in several other things.
You never did the airport commission, though.
Never did the airport commission. Often thought about it. It was always hotly contested seats. but with that, I never put in for the airport commission. But and then I was a legislative liaison, which is a position that's unique to the islands, and I did that.
The Vineyard has one as well.
They do, yeah. And we say it's unique to the island. It actually is. Something that was created because of redistricting years ago. Constitutionally, the islands, actually in the Massachusetts Constitution, are supposed to have a representative in the General Court. So when they, it was challenged, it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they decided that districts had to be similar in number. So if you had one vote, one person, it was all equal. So we lost that our legislative seats, and we're connected with the mainland in '78. And one of the things that's I'd never forget, and it's always been kind of something I've been very pleased with, is the fact that an islander finally got to see. I worked with Eric Turkington, liked him a lot, and he did a terrific job for us for 20 years, and I think very highly of him, and he did a great job representing the islands. But it was nice to see an islander could get elected, and I'm the first, but I'm sure I won't be the last. So.
Isn't Falmouth growing pretty fast, that district?
It is.
But then it'll be evened out. So,
the Vineyard's growing as well, and as is Nantucket. And they're all growing at a decent little clip there. But with that being said, the Vineyard, we think of it, and naturally so, of being so much like Nantucket and thinking of it being an island. But really, there's 6 towns there. And they can be fairly parochial, and they have 6, which is a good thing. The towns are very unique and different. They have their own character.
Imagine if Sconset was a town.
Absolutely. And you have 6 boards of selectmen and 6 town managers and 6 point of views. So they have a few things that kind of bind them together. The Martha's Vineyard Commission, for one. and the regional high school.
Isn't
for the
there
other program.
isn't there a Dukes County Commission too?
Yes, there is. And the Dukes County is much more of a county form of government than ours is. Ours is, primarily because we are a county, and
Right.
there's benefits to being a county. Dukes County is one of those things where I think counties serve a purpose if they choose to, and I think Dukes County is striving to do that as a county. There is some pushback because it's the additional expense to the towns to fund the county.
So what do you consider your accomplishments to have been? Not
Yeah.
only for Nantucket, but for everybody in the district.
Well, there's accomplishments that were legislative, and then there were some accomplishments that I think were more of persuasive. One of the things that and it sounds silly, but I'm probably the only person on the island that has one, and will probably be the only one that ever does. But I actually have a Martha's Vineyard license plate, and I committed to it right away. I have a Nantucket one as well, different numbers, but
One on the front and one on the back?
Yeah, that would be fun to do. But with that, I saw what Nantucket was doing, and the funds made great sense. I'd known Logan from the school there for a while, and quite frankly, this is the local school,
Right.
but I felt that Martha's Vineyard had a group called Martha's Vineyard Community Services over there, and they're kind of the head agency that services the whole island, and I got to know some individuals there, and like any other nonprofit, they're looking for funding sources, and I said, really, you ought to do a license plate. That's money that'll just come in, and it's some heavy lifting to begin with, but after the fact, and it really took some, I hate to say it, almost arm twisting, but pleading and begging and trying to impress upon them that it's worth the initial lift. Because it's very difficult for a nonprofit to come up with the time and the personnel
Right.
to kind of get it off the ground.
Right.
And it's a
And
huge
here it was
commitment.
a collective effort.
Yeah, exactly. And they were wondering whether or not they had to go there. And I think their thought was is that if the monies got diluted too much, then it wouldn't have the impact. So they did it solely as Martha's Vineyard Community Services, and they're delighted with it. It was quite a campaign, and they had a lot of fun with it. So. That was one of the things that's not legislative. We talked a little bit about some of the other things. Initially, Nantucket didn't have a vote on the Oceans Commission. It was kind of like, wow, here we are surrounded by water, but we don't have a voting member. We changed that the first legislative session. The other thing, Martha's Vineyard Commission, and the Cape Cod Commission, had in earlier drafts been part of the ocean plan so that they would play a role in those type of any projects in the
Right.
water. They were both removed at the 11th hour, and consequently getting those two things back into that particular piece of legislation were key. The sheriff's bill was kind of an earlier battle, and we had the public safety bill, and someone said, well, it's not necessarily a real popular thing here to spend money on. Well, I wasn't looking to advocate one way or the other for the facility, but I was going to advocate for the funding.
Right.
All the sheriffs are kind of funded in different ways, or used to be, and we had the deeds tax, which was going away. That's all there was to it.
Right.
The sheriff's departments were being brought under the administration. They all wanted it. They were unanimous in their support for it. I was kind of like the lone wolf out there yelling, well, wait a minute, we're going to lose this revenue, and we have some things that we've committed to on this island that depend upon that funding. So I was able to get a budget amendment in early on to do, not only for the construction, but also for the furnitures and fixtures there, which was key. And along those lines, the same thing, similar in nature over on the Vineyard, they don't have police departments with individual lockups. They all use the Dukes County.
Community.
Exactly. Their police departments just don't have any lockups. So they have a facility over there as part of the Dukes County Sheriff's, and he has a lockup, and it's in a building in Edgartown that he owns and the county owns. And that was, all the real estate holdings were being absorbed by that. And consequently, I said, the status quo is fine for now, but I was able to get language in there so that it ever no longer serves as a public safety, that they will provide money or allow them to continue to use that for local lockup. So you kind of had to pay attention to some of the finer details, and I've had some luck in getting some of those things in.
What about the frustrations? What were the
Frustrations
some of your things
are-
that you were really trying to get done that never?
Frustrations. You can think of a few. I think the housing bank bill, which I kind of we're in the waning days of that. Would have liked to have seen that move forward. I think that the new bill that they've put forward is a little bit easier to understand, and consequently I think it'll be a little bit easier to get some support up in Boston. Some of the other frustrations were, we just learned of the governor's 9C cuts, and you work hard for certain earmarks in those budgets, and they really are very difficult to do. And shellfish propagation,
Right.
which I know you're very friendly with, unfortunately was just cut.
Again?
And, yeah, cut again. So what we'll do as a legislature, I hope that we'll go back in January, and the new legislator will certainly get up to speed on it, and we'll try to. It's different than overriding his vetoes, because we already did that. We sent a strong message that we support what we put into the budget. But he has, at the administrative level, they have some unilateral things that they can do. And so he did that, and hopefully we'll restore those fundings. But when you work that hard for something and then find it the rug pulled from underneath at the very last, those are things that can be frustrating.
What advice do you have for Dylan Fernandez, your successor?
Dylan I've met with several times. I think he's a bright young man, and he's very energetic, and I think he'll do well. I think we're fortunate to have such good candidates. Even at the end, I mean, we had two young men that were running for this office that we couldn't have gone wrong with. So I'm pleased that we had good choices. With that, I think that Dylan will do well. He knows how to kind of network with people up there. If I had to give him advice, it would be, pay attention, because these towns are all individually different. Read the newspapers, read between the lines, and pay attention. Things that he may be used to from one town, or think that that's applicable in another, isn't always the case. So, pay attention, and also learn to take your guidance a little bit from your elected officials. They're the ones who are a bit on the firing line, the selectmen. So they kind of, don't hesitate to reach out to them and find out why they made this decision or why they think it's important. And I don't say this just because you're a retired newspaper guy, but I think anyone that doesn't pay attention to the newspapers and editorials and so forth like that are doing themselves a disservice, because I think newspapers, as much as we sometimes may disagree with them, they do have a good pulse of what's going on, and I've learned a lot from just keeping up with the papers. It helped me when I was running, and I stuck to it. So,
where's the paper? Is there a Falmouth paper?
There is. It's the Enterprise, and Huff over there is just terrific. He's such a nice guy, and fortunately for me, it's one of those things where I'm usually in support and agree with what the editorial says. Not always, but most often I applaud them for kind of setting the tone and making those announcements. So.
Does Dylan Fernandez get to appoint the new legislative liaison? How does that work?
He does. It's interesting. First thing he probably will do is meet with the speaker to find out what the ground rules are and make sure that it is permissible for him to do it. There's always, when I went up there was budget cuts, and there was concern of how many positions were going to be lost. And fortunately, we were able to hold on to it. We were mistakenly under the impression here on the islands that these positions were created specifically for the islands. And as much the creation of the position by virtue of having, it was Dukes and Nantucket that came, it said the islands shall have representation. So they always felt that at least one of the islands would. But as it turned out, originally it said but they can't reside in the part of the district where the legislator lives. So with that, I appointed the very first Falmouth legislative liaison, and he's actually someone who was working with Eric Turkington, and I just kept them on. And then hired someone who had actually had State House experience, but was very well liked and respected on the vineyard as the liaison for there. And Dylan will have to do the same thing. So, it'll be a tough decision, and he'll have to try to fit someone that fits his needs. We talked about it a little bit the other day when we were here, and I said, we all know, even though we don't necessarily like to share our weaknesses, but we know them, and try to find people that can complement. Exactly. So
good. Let's talk a little bit about the changing political face. I mean, obviously not Washington, but even locally.
Right.
You were saying that there has been a shift in the Cape and Islands.
Yeah, there has been. When I got elected, we had in what we call the Cape delegation, there's 2 senators that represent it, and then you've got 6 legislators that represent either all of the Cape and Islands and part of the right over the bridge. and we had one Republican in the lot. I ran as an independent, but quickly became a Democrat. And now it's changed dramatically. You know, we had 2 Democratic senators. Now we have a Republican senator and a Democratic senator. And the rep seats have gone from where there were, you know, what it was before. Now there's 4 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So there's, you know, 5 Republicans and 3
how much the
Democrats.
mix has changed in the assembly overall, hasn't it?
It has.
Somewhat?
It has. When I first got elected, there were 16 Republican reps. Now I think there's up to 33.
Out of how many?
Out of 160. So they're still in the minority. But you know, we've been fortunate. Most of the Republicans that we're up there with are moderate and open-minded, and I like to think they keep us honest, maybe. But they bring a perspective that I think the leadership has done a good job in respecting as much as they can, even though we may have some philosophical differences. We have tried to find middle ground, you know, as with our budgets. I mean, there's been very few times when we haven't had a unanimous vote in the House on the budget. So the Republicans have gotten the buy-in. There's been a few what I would call Tea Party Republicans elected over the last few years who may vote off, but usually we try to work with everyone. So.
Is there a concern in Boston that the Commonwealth may suffer a little bit because of the change in administration?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of concern. We still have a primary Democratic delegation, which we have some strong voices in Congress. But with that being said, I think we'd be foolish not to realize that there could be some ramifications. I mean, people do like to be supporting the winner,
right.
And quite frankly, we're pretty outspoken in our position that Trump wasn't our person, and I don't think he's deaf.
I'm sure he's not. So what's next on your?
Yeah, I'm not sure. You know, it's fortunate to be in a situation where, you know, I can now kind of pick and choose. I'll wait and see what comes up, whether it's something that's, I won't, you know, jump into something right away unless the perfect thing comes up. And I don't have any illusions about whether it has to be something bigger or better. I just want to do something that I enjoy. A number of years ago, I was telling someone I worked as a bird monitor, and I think Max Berry's son David does that now. Yeah. And I told David it was one of the best jobs I had. You know, kind of walking.
He's also a deputy shellfish warden. He says it's one of the worst jobs he's ever had.
Well, you can't have it both ways, David.
That's right.
But with that, you know, so you know, something that makes me feel good, you know, is what I'll do. I'll hold out for. You know, we're fortunate on this island, in that respect, there's always someone looking for someone to help them out.
You can have to fight them off.
Right. So.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
One last question that I asked Rick Atherton yesterday, when we were interviewing him too, is the form of government we have in Nantucket still workable as things change and become more complex? And
you know, I don't know. You know, I've represented
from your sort of bird's eye perspective.
You know, I'm a fan of town meeting. I totally get the idea where people get frustrated and people don't show up. And you know, I remember Nancy Severance once made a comment that was true. You can't regulate people's involvement. Right. And with that, you know, I was on the original charter committee, and we thought about a representative town meeting, and there's some merit to that, I guess. Falmouth has that, and I've been to most of their town meetings. And but it's interesting. What I have found pretty universally is that they're the same people and the same characters and the same dialogue, just different names.
I think that's probably very fair.
You know, so it's not
the same people sniping at them.
Yes, exactly. It's not the perfect form of government, but I'm not sure what the alternative would be. You know, whether we went to a city or a town council type thing where they had more authority. You know, that might be something to look at. You know, I think if we get to the point where fewer and fewer people show up for a town meeting, then we may have to look at alternatives, because you can't have special interest groups, you know, basically dictating policy in a town. I don't think. I think you need to have the dialogue and the discussion. You know, I will share a story that I've shared with a few people before when they talk about decisions that are made. And I thought back on it a number of years ago. We had a movement to have the Board of Health be separately from the Board of Selectmen and be elected. We've since gone to that, but at the time it was a non-binding ballot
They're
question.
appointed, they're not elected.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the idea was that they wanted to be separate from the Board of Selectmen. And at the time, this was back in the 90s and or early 2000s, and we had a non-binding ballot question, and it passed pretty strongly at town meeting. I mean, at the election booth, which back then was the week before town meeting. And then all of a sudden we had town meeting, and lo and behold, the conversations started going in a way where you knew that they weren't going to support the vote of the general public. And someone called them on it and said, you know, we just voted overwhelmingly to do this. And now we as a smaller group here are going to vote to, you know, not follow the lead of the electorate. And someone got up in the back, and it was a young fellow. I wouldn't know who he was today and don't remember his name 2 minutes after he said it.
Right.
But he said, and it was great because he stuck out because he was young, you know. And he said, you know, wait a minute. I voted for this last week at town meeting. Anything you could take away from the selectmen, anything you could do for whatever reasons, made sense to me. And the idea of having a separate Board of Health made sense to me then. But he said, I didn't have the benefit of the discussion we had here tonight. And after listening to the discussion, the pros and cons of a separate Board of Health versus the current system, I'm going to reverse what I did at the election booth, because now I've had the value of the dialogue and the back and forth.
Interesting.
And I thought that was something we should never forget. You know, it's like these ballot questions we have now, where any petitioner can go out there and get, granted there's a lot of numbers, but you put things before the electorate, and a lot of times people haven't really had a chance to come up to speed with those. So they vote and then later go, well, what do you mean we don't have recycling? Or what do you mean water's exempt from a bottle
What do you
bill?
mean we have to regulate marijuana sales?
Right, exactly. Yeah, you know, why do we have to do? So that's the catch-22. You'll have people that support them and they're delighted when theirs pass. And you'll have people that when someone puts something up at a charter school or something, they'll go, oh goodness, no. Right. So there is something to be said for that dialogue and the discussion at the legislative
I think it is very important.
Yeah.
Well, I hope I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the citizens of Nantucket in thanking you for all you've put into this district and this island and town.
Well, I couldn't have done it without Nantucket.
And few years, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it, and happy holidays to you and everyone in Nantucket. I really appreciate the support I've gotten over the years, and it's been an honor to serve them. So it's a great district, and I've gotten to know a lot of people. So
Tim Madden, thank you.
Thank you.